Picture a crowded street in first-century Jerusalem. The sun is high, the marketplace is alive with voices, and suddenly the crowd parts like a wave pulling back from the shore. A figure approaches, stumbling, his hands wrapped in dirty cloth, his face hidden beneath a hood. Before he can speak, someone screams the word that strikes terror into every heart within hearing distance. Leper, unclean, cursed by God himself. Mothers grab their children, merchants abandon their stalls. The circle of empty space around this man grows wider with each passing second. Every medical protocol, every religious law, every social custom of the ancient world agrees on one thing. Do not touch the leper, do not go near the leper, do not breathe the same air as the leper. The priests have declared it, the physicians have confirmed it, the scriptures seem to command it. Contact with a leper means contamination, isolation, and becoming an outcast yourself. And then Jesus does something that makes every witness freeze in shock and horror. He reaches out his hand and touches the leper's skin. The crowd gasps, his disciples step back. The religious leaders watching from a distance begin muttering about blasphemy and defilement. But Jesus does not pull away, he does not recoil. He places his hand directly on the diseased flesh and speaks words that will echo through 2,000 years of history. Be clean. If you have ever felt untouchable, if you have ever believed you were too broken to be healed, if you have ever wondered whether there is any force in this universe that would willingly reach into your pain instead of turning away, then what you are about to discover tonight will change everything you thought you understood about healing, about touch, and about why Jesus chose to violate every medical and religious protocol of his time. Subscribe right now, because what comes next goes deeper than any sermon you have ever heard about this moment. What happened on that street was not just a miracle, it was a message that the religious authorities spent centuries trying to obscure, because if people truly understood what Jesus was communicating through that touch, the entire structure of shame, separation, and spiritual hierarchy would collapse overnight. The leper was not just sick. According to Levitical law found in the book of Leviticus, the leper was legally dead while still breathing. He was cut off from the temple, cut off from worship, cut off from family, cut off from every form of human connection that makes life worth living. The law required him to tear his clothes, cover his face, and cry out unclean, unclean whenever anyone approached, so that the pure could avoid contamination. This was not just a medical quarantine. This was theological exile. The teaching was clear. Leprosy was punishment for sin. If your flesh was rotting, it was because your soul was rot. If your body was falling apart, it was because God himself had marked you as rejected. And the cruelest part of this system was not the physical suffering, it was the isolation. It was the message that you were too impure for love, too contaminated for community, too cursed for compassion. The rabbis debated how far away you needed to stay from a leper. Some said 4 cubits, about 6 feet. Others said 100 cubits if the wind was blowing in your direction. One prominent teacher claimed that if you even made eye contact with a leper, you risked spiritual defilement. The medical understanding of the time supported this fear. Ancient physicians had no concept of bacteria or viruses. They believed disease spread through bad air, through humors, through spiritual corruption that could transfer from one person to another through proximity alone. So the protocol was universal: separation, distance, walls between the clean and the unclean. And anyone who violated this protocol was not considered compassionate. They were considered foolish, reckless, and dangerous to the entire community. This was the world Jesus walked into. These were the rules everyone accepted as common sense. And he shattered them with a single touch. Take a deep breath right now. In through your nose, hold it, feel your lungs expand, now release it slowly. Let your shoulders drop. This moment matters because what I am about to reveal requires you to feel it, not just think it. The touch Jesus used was not accidental. It was not impulsive. It was a deliberate act of theological warfare against a system that had weaponized purity to control and condemn. When Jesus reached out his hand, he was not just healing a disease. He was destroying a doctrine, the doctrine that said some people are too broken to be touched, the doctrine that said separation is holiness, the doctrine that said God's love has boundaries that match our disgust. Every gospel account of this moment emphasizes the same detail. Jesus touched him not after the healing, not once the man was clean. He touched him while he was still leprous. The contamination was still active, the disease was still present, the risk according to every authority was still real. And Jesus touched him anyway. Now here is what the religious teachers of the time expected to happen. They expected Jesus to become unclean. That is how the purity system worked. It was not bidirectional. Holiness did not flow down to purify the impure. Impurity flowed up to contaminate the pure. If a clean person touched an unclean person, the clean person became unclean. It was spiritual physics. It was theological gravity. Everyone knew this, except Jesus operated on a different physics entirely. When he touched the leper, the transfer went the opposite direction. His purity was more powerful than the man's impurity. His wholeness was more contagious than the man's disease. His life force overwhelmed the death force eating away at the leper's flesh. This was not how the system was supposed to work, and that is exactly the point. Jesus was revealing that the entire purity system was built on a lie. The lie that God's power is fragile, that holiness is delicate, that love has to protect itself from contamination. By touching the leper, Jesus demonstrated that divine love is not something that can be polluted. It is a force that transforms whatever it contacts. But there is something even deeper happening in this touch that almost every commentary misses. The Greek word used in the Gospel accounts is haptomai. It does not mean a brief tap or a cautious brush. It means to fasten oneself to cling to take hold of. This was not a tentative finger poke. This was a full contact, sustained touch. Jesus did not touch the leper quickly and pull away. He held on, he connected. He stayed in contact long enough for the man to feel not just physical sensation but emotional recognition. For years, maybe decades, this man had not felt human touch. No hand on his shoulder, no embrace. No casual brush of fingers in a crowded street. Every human instinct to pull away from him had been activated in every person he encountered until his skin became not just diseased but starved for contact. And Jesus gave him what the disease had stolen, not just healing, connection. The touch itself was part of the cure. Modern medical research has discovered something the ancient world did not understand. Human touch affects healing at a biological level. Studies on premature infants show that babies who receive regular touch gain weight faster and develop stronger immune systems. Research on pain management reveals that holding someone's hand reduces the perception of pain more effectively than many medications. Neuroscience has identified that physical contact releases oxytocin, lowers cortisol, and activates healing responses throughout the entire body. Touch is not just comfort, it is medicine. Jesus knew this 2,000 years before scientists could measure it. He knew that the leper needed more than supernatural intervention. He needed human contact. He needed to be reminded that he was not a monster, not a curse, not something to be avoided. He was a person worth touching. A person worth the risk. And Jesus gave him that, knowing full well what it would cost him socially, religiously, and politically. Let me take you into the mind of the religious leaders watching this happen. To them, Jesus had just committed a purity violation so severe that it disqualified him from religious authority. According to the law, he should now be unclean. He should be required to go through purification rituals. He should be barred from the temple until he completes the ceremonial cleansing. But Jesus does not go through any purification ritual. He does not acknowledge that he has been contaminated. He acts as if the touch changed nothing about his status because in his understanding it changed nothing. He was not operating under the law of contamination. He was operating under the law of transformation. And this terrified the religious authorities more than any sermon he could have preached. Why? Because their entire system of power depended on controlling access to purity. They were the gatekeepers. They decided who was clean and who was unclean. They administered the sacrifices, the rituals, the purification ceremonies that allowed people back into community after defilement. This was not just spiritual authority. This was economic power. Every purification ritual required a sacrifice. Every sacrifice required an animal purchased from temple-approved vendors. Every transaction enriched the religious system. If Jesus could touch the unclean and remain pure, if he could transfer holiness instead of receiving contamination, then the entire purification industry became obsolete. People did not need the priests, they did not need the ritual, they did not need the system, they needed Jesus. Or more specifically, they needed what Jesus represented: direct access to divine power that did not require religious intermediaries. This was revolutionary, this was dangerous. And this was exactly why they eventually killed him. But in that moment on the street, before the crucifixion, before the resurrection, before the church turned his message into institution, Jesus was demonstrating something so simple and so radical that we still have not fully absorbed it. Love is contact, healing requires presence. You cannot restore someone from a distance while maintaining your own safety and comfort. True compassion always involves risk. It always involves reaching across the barrier that separates the acceptable from the unacceptable. And it always requires touch. Now let us go deeper into why touch mattered specifically for leprosy. Leprosy, which modern medicine calls Hansen's disease, is caused by bacteria that attacks nerve endings. As the disease progresses, the victim loses sensation in the extremities. They cannot feel pain, they cannot feel temperature, they cannot feel touch. This sounds like it might be a blessing, but it is actually a curse. Without pain receptors functioning, victims injure themselves repeatedly without knowing it. They burn their hands. They cut their feet. They damage their flesh over and over because they cannot feel the warning signals that protect the rest of us. The disease does not make the flesh fall off. The lack of sensation leads to injuries that go untreated and become infected until the tissue dies. So when Jesus touched the leper, he was restoring more than skin. He was restoring the ability to feel, the ability to sense, the ability to know through physical contact that you are still connected to the world around you. The touch itself was a preview of the healing. It said your nerve endings will work again. Your skin will have sensation again. You will feel human contact again, not just today, but for the rest of your restored life. And there is one more layer to this that will make everything click into place. In Jewish culture of the 1st century, touch was how you transferred blessing. Fathers laid hands on sons to pass on inheritance. Rabbis laid hands on disciples to confer authority. Priests laid hands on sacrifices to transfer sin. Touch was the mechanism of transmission. So when Jesus touched the leper, he was doing exactly what the priests did with sacrifices, but in reverse. Instead of transferring the man's uncleanness onto himself, he was transferring his own purity, his own wholeness, his own divine connection onto the man. The touch was the channel, the contact was the conduit, and the healing flowed through it like electricity through a wire. This is why he touched the man before speaking the words. The touch established the connection. The words activated the power already flowing through the contact. Be clean was not a command shouted from a distance. It was a declaration spoken through skin-to-skin contact that carried the force of divine intention directly into the man's body. If you're still with me, if something in you is recognizing that this teaching is not just history but something alive and active right now, comment the words "I receive the touch." Not for me, for yourself. Let it be a declaration that you are ready to receive what Jesus was actually offering. That you are ready to stop believing you are too broken, too contaminated, too far gone to be reached. Subscribe if you have not already, because what is coming in the next videos will take this foundation and build on it in ways that will shatter every remaining barrier between you and the healing you have been seeking. Place your hand on your chest right now, feel your heartbeat. That rhythm has kept you alive through everything you have survived, every moment you thought would destroy you, every season you were certain you would not make it through, your heart kept beating. Now imagine that the same force that kept your heart beating is the same force that moved through Jesus' hand into that leper's body. It is not a force from the past, it is a force in the present. It is the eternal now of divine love that does not recognize time or distance or the barriers we build to protect ourselves from pain. That force is reaching for you right now, not because you earned it, not because you are clean enough or good enough or spiritual enough, but because that is what the force does. It reaches. It touches, it heals. And it does not ask permission from the religious authorities who built entire systems around keeping it contained and controlled. Here is what I need you to understand about your own life. You have lepers, not people with a disease, but parts of yourself that you have quarantined, memories you will not touch, emotions you have declared unclean, aspects of your story that you have wrapped in cloth and hidden from view because you decided they were too shameful, too ugly, too contaminated to be acknowledged. You have internalized the purity system. You have become your own priest, your own judge, your own enforcer of separation. And you are exhausted from maintaining the barriers inside your own soul. Jesus touching the leper was not just about that man on that street. It was about every part of every person that has been labeled untouchable. The abuse you survived, the addiction you fought, the failure you cannot forgive yourself for, the version of yourself that you are ashamed of and hope no one ever discovers. Those are your lepers. And the message of the touch is this: nothing about you is too contaminated for divine love to reach. Nothing about your story is so dark that the light cannot touch it. Nothing about your past is so poisoned that healing cannot flow into it. But here is where it gets challenging. You have to let it be touched. You have to stop hiding the diseased parts. You have to stop maintaining the quarantine. You have to stop crying out unclean, unclean, and pushing away every force that tries to reach you in your pain. This is the opposite of every self-protection instinct you have developed. Your whole life you have been taught to hide weakness, to cover shame, to maintain the appearance of having it together. And what I am telling you is that the healing you are desperate for cannot reach you through the mask. It can only reach you through contact with what is real. Jesus did not heal the leper's potential. He healed the leper's actual rotting flesh. He did not heal the person the man could become after years of therapy and spiritual growth. He healed the man as he was in that moment, disease active, contamination present, unclean by every standard that mattered. That is the kind of healing available to you. Not someday when you finally get yourself together. Right now, in the mess, in the middle of the disease process, in the reality of where you actually are instead of where you wish you were. Let me tell you what happens when you stop quarantining your pain. When you stop pretending the diseased parts do not exist. When you stop maintaining the exhausting performance of purity. First, you will feel exposed, vulnerable, terrified that if people see what you have been hiding, they will confirm your worst fear that you are indeed untouchable. Some people will confirm that fear. Some people are so committed to the purity system that they cannot handle contact with real human brokenness. Let them step back, let them maintain their distance. They are not your healers. They are the crowd on the street who gasped in horror when Jesus reached out his hand. They are bystanders to your healing, not participants in it. Second, you will feel the touch. Not a physical hand necessarily, but the energetic reality of divine love making contact with the part of you that you were certain was too far gone. It will feel like relief, like coming home, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Like permission to finally stop performing and just be human, broken and loved, diseased and touched anyway, unclean by the world's standards and completely acceptable exactly as you are. Third, you will hear the words, "Be clean," not as a command you have to obey, but as a declaration of what is already happening. The healing is not something you achieve, it is something you receive. It is not something you earn through purification rituals. It is something that flows into you through contact with a love that is more powerful than your contamination. And fourth, you will become someone who touches others. You cannot receive this kind of healing and remain a bystander. You cannot experience the radical acceptance of being touched in your uncleanliness and then enforce the purity system on others. Once you know what it feels like to be reached in your isolation, you become someone who reaches. You become someone who is not afraid of other people's mess because you know your mess did not disqualify you. You become dangerous to every religious system that profits from shame because you are living proof that the system is unnecessary. You are walking evidence that divine love does not work the way the gatekeepers claimed, and your very existence threatens their authority. This is why Jesus did not just heal the leper and move on. He sent the man to show himself to the priests as a testimony to them. He sent the healed man back into the system as proof that healing happened outside the system. The priests were supposed to examine people and declare them clean after they went through proper purification. But this man never went through purification. He was touched, he was healed, and now he was showing up to demand that they acknowledge what they did not authorize. Imagine the conversation. The priest examines him and finds no trace of leprosy. His skin is clear, his nerve endings function, by every medical standard he is clean, but he did not go through the protocol, he did not offer the sacrifice, he did not follow the procedure. So what does the priest do? If he declares the man clean, he admits that healing can happen outside the religious system. If he refuses to declare him clean despite obvious evidence, he reveals that the system is not actually about purity but about control. Either way, Jesus wins. Either way, the testimony exposes the truth. Healing does not require permission from the authorities. It requires contact with the source. Right now, wherever you are, I want you to do something. Think of the part of yourself you have quarantined, the memory you refuse to look at, the emotion you will not let yourself feel, the truth about yourself you have never spoken out loud. That is your leper, and what I am about to tell you is not a metaphor, it is instruction. Place your hand on your heart. Feel the warmth of your palm against your chest. Now speak these words out loud. I am touchable, I am reachable, I am healable. Even this, even now, even me. If you just did that, something shifted. You might not feel it yet, you might think it was just words, but you just invited divine love to make contact with the part of you that you had declared off limits. You just opened the quarantine, you just stopped enforcing the separation, and now the healing can begin, not because you are suddenly pure, but because you are finally willing to be touched while you are still in process. That is the whole point. That is the entire message. Healing does not start when you clean yourself up. It starts when you allow yourself to be touched in your mess. Now let me show you how this applies to physical healing. Every protocol, every medical system, every therapeutic approach in the world today still operates on some version of the ancient model. Separate the sick from the well, isolate the infection, contain the contamination, and there is wisdom in that for bacterial and viral diseases. Quarantine saves lives, but we have taken that medical wisdom and turned it into a spiritual principle that damages lives. We quarantine the sick emotionally. We isolate them socially. We treat them as if their value diminishes with their health. And then we wonder why healing rates are so low, why depression accompanies chronic illness, why people with long-term conditions report that the isolation is worse than the disease. Jesus showed us a different way. He moved toward the sick, he made contact, he stayed present, and his presence activated healing that the protocols said was impossible. Modern studies are finally catching up to what he demonstrated. Research shows that patients with strong social connection heal faster from surgery. Cancer patients with robust support systems have better outcomes. People recovering from heart attacks who report feeling loved and supported have lower mortality rates than those who are isolated regardless of the severity of their initial condition. Touch is medicine. Connection is treatment. Presence is therapeutic. And isolation, even medically necessary isolation, has a cost that we are only beginning to measure. So here is the instruction for you if you are dealing with physical illness right now. Stop believing that your sickness makes you untouchable. Stop apologizing for your body's limitations. Stop hiding your pain because you think it makes other people uncomfortable. Your healing does not require you to suffer alone. It does not require you to protect others from the reality of what you are experiencing. It requires you to let yourself be touched, literally if possible, energetically always. You need to feel contact. You need to know you are not contaminated. You need the message delivered not through words but through presence that your illness does not define your worth. And if the people in your life cannot give you that, if they maintain distance because your sickness scares them or inconveniences them or reminds them of their own mortality, then you need new people. You need a community that operates on Jesus' model instead of the purity model. You need people who reach toward pain instead of away from it. If this teaching is landing in your spirit, if you feel something shifting, comment the words "touch changes everything." Let other people who are watching know they are not alone in receiving this. Like this video so the algorithm stops suppressing teachings that actually have the power to heal. Share it with someone you know who needs to hear that they are not too broken to be touched. And subscribe because the next video goes even deeper into the specific ways Jesus violated medical and religious protocols to release healing that the system said was impossible. We are going to talk about the woman with the issue of blood, the man born blind, and the paralytic at the pool. Each story reveals another layer of how Jesus used contact, presence, and connection to heal what the authorities said was permanent. But for tonight, let this truth settle into your bones. You are touchable. Every part of you, every story, every wound, every shame, nothing about you is so contaminated that love will not reach for it. Nothing about you is so broken that healing cannot flow into it. Nothing about you is so far gone that divine presence will not make contact. The religious systems of every age want you to believe that purity comes first, that you have to clean yourself up before you can be accepted. But Jesus touched the leper first, before the healing, before the change, before the transformation. He made contact with the contamination and let his purity overwhelm it. That same force is reaching for you right now, not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but because that is what it does. It reaches, it touches, it heals, and it does not ask permission from anyone who built their power on keeping you isolated. The touch has already been extended. Your only choice is whether you will receive it.